In the headlines this hour, Japan says North Korea has agreed to reopen probe into Japanese abductees while it's easing sanctions on the regime on that condition. Less than a week to go till the local elections in Korea, and polls are showing a very tight race this time. And Korea posts a current account surplus for the 26th straight month in April, but a drop in imports adds worries over the country's slow spending.
Hello everybody, thanks for joining us. I'm Kang Tae-ri in Seoul. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe says that North Korea has agreed to reopen an investigation on the Japanese citizens abducted by North Korea decades ago. In a brief statement to reporters Thursday evening Korea time, Abe announced that the agreement is just a first step toward clearing up the abduction case that has strained bilateral relations. Japan's chief cabinet secretary also told reporters separately that Japan is easing sanctions, some sanctions against the communist state once the probe is launched. Pyongyang had admitted in 2002 that it kidnapped 13 Japanese nationals in the 70s and 80s to help train spies, 5 of whom returned to Japan. The North has insisted that the remaining 8 had died. The United States is weighing up whether to deploy an advanced missile defense system in South Korea. The Pentagon is making a fresh push to expand a U.S.-led system to its allies in Northeast Asia to counter the North Korean missile threat. Park Ji-won tells us more.
Quoting a Pentagon official, the Wall Street Journal reports that Washington has conducted a site survey for possible deployment locations in South Korea for its Theater High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD. No final decision has been made yet on the system, which is designed to intercept a diverse range of missiles. South Korean officials have long indicated that Seoul would prefer to develop its own defenses rather than taking part in the U.S.-led system. With that in mind, the report quotes the Pentagon official as saying that the U.S. could deploy the THAAD system to South Korea for a temporary period and then replace it with another system purchased by Seoul. It could also let Seoul buy its own missile defense system. The vice chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, James Winnefeld, meanwhile, is calling for better regional missile defense cooperation between South Korea and Japan. Speaking at a seminar in Washington Wednesday, Winnefeld emphasized the importance of developing a regional missile defense system between its main allies to effectively counter North Korean threats. U.S. Congress also passed a bill last week calling on the defense secretary to assess the opportunities to strengthen ballistic missile defense cooperation among Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington. This is raising pressure on South Korea to join the U.S.-led missile defense system. Given Seoul's reluctance to join the U.S.-led system and the development of its own missile defense system, the issue is expected to be one of top agenda items at an upcoming trilateral meeting between the defense chiefs of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan. The officials are scheduled to meet this weekend on the sidelines of the Asia Security Summit in Singapore. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
A UN Human Rights Office to monitor human rights conditions in North Korea will be set up in South Korea. The Geneva-based office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights said Wednesday that its field-based structure will be set up in Seoul. The South Korean government has already given its approval. The decision to open the Seoul office was made after the UN Council adopted a report in March denouncing North Korea's systematic human rights violations. The field office will be operated independently according to UN's basic principles. It's expected to be set up in the latter half of this year. Just 6 days to go until Koreans head to the voting booths for the local elections, and beginning today, we in the media are not allowed to release new opinion polls, so our Kwon-soa has the latest and the last pulse check before the early voting begins tomorrow.
The races are tightening up with less than a week to go until the elections. Voters are in the final stages of deciding on which mayor or governor they want to represent them. The latest official poll numbers show the ruling Saenuri Party has the upper hand in 6 regions, the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy in 5, and 1 independent candidate leading in the city of Gwangju, while the rest of the 5 regions are neck and neck at this stage. An opinion poll conducted by Research and Research has the incumbent mayor of Seoul, Park Won-soon, still in lead over his conservative rival Chung Mong-jun, but the gap has narrowed compared to 2 weeks ago. In Gyeonggi-do province, which has the largest number of eligible voters, the ruling Saenuri Party's candidate for governor Nam Kyung-pil has a slight lead over the opposition candidate Kim Jin-pyo. A very tense race is expected in Busan, which is getting a lot of attention this time around, as independent candidate Oh Ga-don is receiving great support. This was one of the last polls used by various media Thursday. The National Election Commission forbids the release of any newly conducted opinion polls 6 days ahead of the elections. For those who won't be able to vote on June 4th, early voting in Korea will open for the first time on Friday for 2 days at some 3,500 polling stations across the country. Anything could happen in the coming days to turn the ratings on their head, as the voter tendency among different age groups and the voter turnout play a big role in the actual results. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
President Park Geun-hye says implementing tighter safety regulations and inspections following last month's ferry accident will not hinder her deregulation drive to spur growth, but help raise Korea's growth potential. Speaking to the Wall Street Journal, the president said her 3-year economic innovation plan also includes cracking down on unfair business practices and irregularities. This after the ferry operators' failure to comply with maritime safety rules was found to be a main cause of the tragic accident. On North Korea, President Park said if Pyongyang pushes ahead with another nuclear test, it would set a precedent for other countries in the region as well. While touting Beijing's efforts for regional peace and stability, she called on Tokyo to work on rebuilding trust with Seoul by addressing historical issues between the two sides. Authorities have so far been unable to track down Yoo Byung-un, the practical owner of the sunken Sewol-ho ferry, who remains on the run. But they did track down his assets, which total well over $200 million, and they were granted approval on this Thursday to freeze them. For the latest, here is Shin Se-min.
Korean prosecutors have been given approval to freeze more than $200 million worth of assets held by the owner family of the sunken Sewol-ho ferry. Yoo Byung-un, the head of Cheongjin Marine Company, which operated the ill-fated ferry, and his family are suspected of having accumulated at least $234 million worth of earnings through various crimes, both at home and abroad. A district court in Incheon on Thursday granted a request by the Incheon District Prosecutor's Office to freeze the assets of Yoo and his 3 children to prevent them from stashing away cash or real estate holdings before trials. Yoo and his 3 children, Samna, Taegyun, and Hyuki, are wanted on a string of corruption charges and irregularities that are believed to have contributed to the sinking of the ferry. It is all part of an effort to hold a fugitive family criminally liable for the deadly April 16th disaster. Meanwhile, a French court has rejected a request by Yoo Byung-un's eldest daughter, Samna, to be released on bail. The process for having her extradited to Korea began Wednesday, but could take up to a year. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Kang Chae-ri for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, finding ways to On the current account front, April was another bullish month for Korea, Asia's 4th largest economy. Central bank officials attribute this to strong auto and steel exports, but our Hwang Ji tells us that's not all to the story.
Korea has posted a current account surplus every month for more than 2 years now. The central bank said Thursday that the nation posted a surplus of over $7.1 billion last month. That's a tad less than the $7.3 billion surplus in March, but up by more than $2.5 billion from the same month last year. The Bank of Korea said the current account surplus was helped by strong shipments of automobiles, petroleum, and steel products that led overall exports of products to rise 10% in April from the previous year to more than $56 billion. But imports dropped nearly 1% to $46 billion, raising concerns that the nation's continuous surplus trend is mostly down due to sluggish domestic demand.
Last year, import numbers were very bad, and that means this year's imports would have a very good base effect for a rise. But imports still dropped, indicating sluggish domestic demand.
The strong current account surplus might also burden local exporters in that it will add additional upward pressure to the strengthening Korean won. The Bank of Korea has forecast the surplus for the year to reach $68 billion. This target looks attainable considering the accumulated surplus in the January to April period already stands at over $22 billion. And the central bank expects the current account surplus to extend to a 27th straight month in May on strong exports. Hwang Ji-ae, ARIRANG News.
Moody's says Korea will join the ranks of advanced economies by 2018. Thomas Byrne, the senior vice president for the credit rating agency, was speaking to reporters in Seoul this Thursday, where he said Korea will catch up to countries like France in terms of GDP per person in just 3 to 4 years' time. He chalked up the development to Korea's government policies and competitiveness, adding that Korea has maintained more rapid growth compared to other G20 countries. Byrne said he expects the country's GDP to grow 3.8% this year. That is slightly higher than recent predictions by local, private, as well as state-run think tanks. Achieving peace and prosperity anywhere in the world is a tall task, and Asia is no exception. Historical and territorial disputes between neighboring countries have inflamed tensions in recent months. To talk over ways to cool them, world leaders and experts have gathered on Korea's southern island of Jeju for a 3-day global forum. Connie Kim files this report.
Under this year's theme of Designing New Asia, the 9th Jeju Forum for Peace and Prosperity kicked off Thursday. At the opening ceremony, former Australian Prime Minister and former Chinese Foreign Minister called for rising conflicts in the region to be resolved peacefully, including the North Korea issue.
The new leader, Kim Jong-un, comes across as both dangerous and erratic. It is important that China and others in the region explain to their neighbours the pace and scope of their military modernisation to build confidence and trust.
China's rise in power and its territorial disputes in the East and South China Seas were the focus during a discussion that followed the opening ceremony.
The rise of powerful nations in the West came at the expense of other countries. As a peace-loving nation, China has never sought to invade other countries. The progress and development realized by China came peacefully.
Regarding its territorial disputes, the former foreign minister said China had sovereignty over the areas.
There is free navigation in the South China Sea, so we always welcome this. However, interfering in the territory is unfair behavior. We need to resolve this through diplomacy.
For peace to be realized in Asia, the speakers agreed that regional economic partnerships and free trade pacts were positive ways to enhance cooperation and diffuse tensions. Amid a number of territorial and historical conflicts in the region, world leaders and experts have gathered to discuss ways to resolve the differences for the sake of peace and prosperity. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News, Jeju.
There's no denying that Korea is one of the most wired countries in the world, and Koreans going mobile and smart for their banking is not news either. But our Kim Ji-yeon tells us that that smart banking is set to change how Koreans interact with each other as well.
Koreans usually express their congratulations to newlyweds by giving them cash gifts enclosed in an envelope. However, this tradition may change with the evolution of mobile messengers, which now offers the newest feature of financial services. Korea's #1 mobile messenger, Kakao, introduced a way for users to trade stocks in February, called Stocks Plus Kakao, and said they'd be able to conduct money transfers through an application in the latter half of this year. Users can deposit about $490 into their Kakao bank wallet and can transfer up to $89 a day to their acquaintances. The service is expected to be widely used by Koreans for common acts such as sending gifts of condolence or congratulations to their family and friends. Users can then transfer the received money straight into their personal banking account the next day. Kakao is just one example of how the evolution of mobile messengers is expected to pave a new tradition and way of social exchange. It may even rival existing platforms like internet banking and home trading systems for stocks. Here in Korea, home to some of the world's most tech-savvy consumers, 8 out of 10 people use their smartphones to do some of their banking. The Bank of Korea says the number of smartphone banking users exceeded 40 million this year for the very first time. Kim Jeon, ARIRANG News.
All the best that Korea has to offer in the form of defense technology will be on display for the next few days at an exhibition just outside of Seoul. Among the visitors on the first day today was President Park Geun-hye, who talked about opening up a new era in defense. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
President Park Geun-hye at the opening ceremony of the Korea Defense Technology Exhibition in Kintex, northwest of Seoul, on Thursday, emphasized the importance of civilian and military technology cooperation.
국방 분야의 우수한 기술이 민간에 적용되면 지금까지 없었던 새로운 가치가 창출될 수 있습니다. 그동안 우리나라는 꾸준히 선진 국방 기술을 축적해 왔고 수준 높은 민간 과학기술 역량을 보유하고 있기 때문에 민군 기술 협력의 시너지는 매우 크다고 할 수 있습니다.
The technical cooperation began in 1970 and has created over $1 billion in added value.
Over the past 40 years, we have invested $1.5 billion and in return made $18 billion, a 16-fold increase in economic effect.
The defense industry also created tens of thousands of jobs, boosting Korea's economy. Just last year alone, Korea's defense industry's total value was worth over $34 billion. Jointly hosted by the Science and Defense Ministries, the exhibition displays thousands of military gadgetry, with some aimed to significantly enhance military performance in the near future.
I'm wearing state-of-the-art bulletproof equipment called a super soldier. With this strapped on, a soldier is not only better protected, but they can march much further and carry much heavier weight.
The exhibition gives the public a small glimpse at the Korean military's capabilities in defense technology and will be open to the public for 4 days through June 1st. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News, Paju.
A multinational crew of astronauts has safely arrived at the International Space Station amid worsening ties between Russia and the United States. For more on the story, we are joined by Paul Yi at the News Center. Paul, despite increasing tensions back here on Earth, it looks like this program remains a symbol of cooperation for all countries. What's it like up there?
Well, the commander of the ISS expedition, Oleg Kotov, hosted a welcoming party for his new crewmates as they orbited the planet more than 410 kilometers above the Pacific Ocean. NASA officials and their Russian counterparts added that they still hold warm relations and said there was no room for politics in space. The new team includes veteran Russian cosmonaut Maxim Surev, U.S. Navy pilot Reid Wiseman, and German geophysicist Alexander Gers. The team made the 6-hour journey to the station after blasting off from Kazakhstan in a Soyuz rocket on Wednesday. Their 6-month mission aboard the $100 billion station will mainly consist of scientific research. The project involves 15 nations and is overseen by the United States and Russia. However, as you said, Charity, relations between Moscow and Washington have fallen to their lowest since the end of the Cold War, casting doubts on the future of the space station. Following a series of sanctions imposed on Moscow over its annexation of Crimea, Russian officials said they would not support a U.S. proposal to keep the station operating beyond 2020. While the U.S. provides the majority of the funding, it's been largely dependent on Russia for rocket launches after NASA was forced to scrap its shuttle program.
So lots of politics here on this planet. Now, leaders of Eurosceptic parties are meeting in Brussels in a bid to form an alliance in the future European Parliament. So, Paul, are we going to see a rapid change in the EU with this rise of these anti-establishment groups?
Well, Sunday's European parliamentary election saw quite a dramatic result. There was a strong swing towards these new extreme nationalist parties from across the political spectrum. However, overall control still remains in the hands of traditional parties that want a more united Europe. And that's a sentiment we've been seeing in Brussels, where hundreds of demonstrators gathered to protest these Eurosceptic parties. French, Italian, Dutch, Belgium, and Austrian populist party leaders are trying to capitalize on their recent momentum and create a political grouping. In order to do that, they'll need 25 members of parliament from 7 states to jump on board.
But I am very confident that maybe not tomorrow, but in the next few weeks, we will be able to establish 7 parties, at least from 7 different countries. If you ask us which party are you talking to and when and where, of course, we will not tell you that. But I'm confident that it will happen because we believe we are writing history here. We are writing history in the European Union, and we are writing...
Meanwhile, leaders of the 28-nation bloc are also wrapping up a summit in Brussels, with many calling on the European Council to address this growing shift in voter sentiment. British Prime Minister David Cameron said the EU had gotten too big, too bossy, and too interfering.
Now, the former military chief in Egypt, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, has won a sweeping victory in Egypt's presidential election after wrapping up 3 days of voting there. So what's been the reaction like in Cairo so far?
Well, thousands of Egyptians poured into the streets of the capital, cheering and waving flags in celebration of General al-Sisi's victory. According to judicial sources, Sisi captured nearly 93% of the votes cast in more than 50% of polling stations across the country. His only rival, leftist candidate Hamdin Sahabi, gained about 4%, while another 4% of the votes were voided. The general who toppled Egypt's first freely elected leader, Mohamed Morsi, has now joined a long line of leaders drawn from the military. But many of Sisi's supporters expressed hope for change.
It will change 180 degrees in Sisi's era. We were living in anxiety in our homes and on the street with robberies and carjackings. There was real anxiety. Now, God will calm the situation with Sisi in the picture. He is a patriotic man, and a patriotic man will not sell his country to any person. You see him in his speech. He only knows God and country.
Polling stations were open for a 3rd day due to lower voter participation. Turnout was 44% of Egypt's 54 million voters. That's less than the 40 million votes, or 80% of the electorate, that Sisi had called for last week.
And finally, the technology giant Apple has officially confirmed that it will purchase Beats Electronics in a deal worth more than $3 billion US. Paul, we did hear rumors about this more than 2 weeks ago, but what exactly is Apple getting in this buyout?
Well, according to Apple executives, they're getting 3 things: a pool of talented engineers, a leading headphone maker, and a popular music streaming service. This is Apple's biggest acquisition in the company's 30-year history, and it actually goes against the late Steve Jobs' late view of buying only smaller and less expensive startups. The deal is also seen as Apple's effort to make up for lost ground in the music streaming market, the fastest growing segment of the music industry. Services like Pandora and Spotify have raced ahead of iTunes Radio, which the company launched last year. The iPhone maker also gains a line of high-end headphones that's popular with young and urban demographics and reportedly boasts revenues of over $1 billion a year. As part of the deal, Beats co-founders Jimmy Iovine and rapper Dr. Dre will join the Apple family. However, what specific role they'll play in the future of the company still remains to be seen.
All right, Paul, let's leave it there for now, but we'll see you back here in just about 2 hours. It was yet another hot and sweltering day here in Seoul, and I did hear that similar conditions were felt in other regions as well. And our Kim Bo-kyung is joining us with more from the Weather Center. Bo-kyung.
Well, today was the hottest day of the season so far. Daytime highs in Seoul peaked at 30.9 degrees and about 35.6 degrees over in Daegu. At the moment, the nation is under the influence of a high pressure front from waters south of Jeju, which is leading to mostly clear skies across the map. Well, if you thought today was hot, brace yourselves for even hotter conditions. Friday's daytime high in most parts of the country will jump to over 30 degrees. Otherwise, fine dust readings are now back to normal in most parts of the central regions, but they will continue to remain high, mostly in the southern regions through tomorrow morning. On to Friday's readings. Seoul tops out at 32 degrees. Daegu and Gwangju soar to the mid-30s. Taking a look at other places, Jeju starts off the day at 18 degrees before reaching 28 in the afternoon. Dokdo and Mount Kumgang hit 21 and 30. And that's all the updates for now, and back to you, Teddy.
Bo-kyung, thank you very much for that. And that does it for this edition of ARIRANG News at 8. Thanks for watching.